Ebrahim Zolfaghari is not simply a figure in the 2026 conflict between Iran and the Western powers. He is becoming something unprecedented, a global icon, a symbol of resistance, a figure whose voice echoes far beyond battlefields and capitals. In the early years of his career, Zolfaghari was a strategist trained in Iran's most elite institutions, a man forged within the structures of defense, doctrine, and discipline. But no biography could have predicted the strange alchemy of modern war, where media has become as powerful a front as artillery, and information as defining as territory. When the conflict escalated and airstrikes struck Iranian cities, targeting infrastructure, schools, neighborhoods, and ordinary lives, the world began to see an extraordinary transformation. What was once a distant regional conflict became a global narrative battle. And in that battle, Ebrahim Zolfaghari emerged not just as a spokesman for Iran's defense forces, but as a master of the media war, a strategist who understood that in the 21st century, perception is not secondary to reality. It is reality. Unbeknownst to many, there is a shifting tide in global public opinion. For decades, Western media had shaped the narrative about Iran, portraying it as a threat, a sponsor of instability, a pariah state. Millions absorbed that narrative, generation after generation. But something shifted in 2026, something unstoppable. Across the world, young people, particularly Gen Z, began rejecting the old media frameworks. They saw through the filters. They questioned the assumptions. They started producing content, clips, animated sequences, short videos that told a different story. Not in Persian, not in Arabic, but often in English, Spanish, and other languages. Strangely, powerfully, ordinary content creators in America, Europe, Africa, and Asia began producing viral AI-enhanced clips in favor of Iran's perspective on the conflict. Many were not Iranians. Many had never been to Tehran. They were ordinary people, students, filmmakers, gamers, activists, who saw what they saw with their own eyes. Images of bombed schools, grieving parents, devastated cities, and a nation refusing to crumble under pressure. These clips did something no traditional propaganda machine ever could. They broke through. They bypassed institutional control. They bypassed gatekeepers. They entered the global consciousness as entertainment, emotion, meme, and moral narrative all at once. In the background of this cultural phenomenon stood Ebrahim Zolfaghari, not by accident, but by strategy. He spoke English fluently, articulately, and unexpectedly. Western audiences, conditioned to imagine Iranians through the prism of decades-old stereotypes, were startled to hear a voice that was composed, intelligent, confident, and unfiltered. His fluency stripped away the caricatures. What appeared instead was human, articulate, and compelling. One particular clip, short, viral, and relentless, became a defining moment in digital warfare. In that clip, Zolfaghari addressed former US President Donald Trump directly, with a line that exploded on social networks.
Hey Trump, you are fired.
Hey Trump, you are fired. It was bold, irreverent, provocative, and strangely well received across platforms that were once dominated by Western narratives. Americans, Europeans, Africans, Latin Americans, all over the world, shared, mocked, approved, debated, and engaged with that clip. It was not simply a message. It was a meme-turned moment, a digital confrontation that transcended language and culture. And the world took notice. In that instant, Zolfaghari became not just a military spokesman, but a global personality, a man whose words were clipped, remixed, translated, reproduced, and reinterpreted by millions. A man who became, in the eyes of ordinary people across continents, a hero of media resistance, a voice against what they perceived as entrenched global power, bias, and narrative manipulation. This phenomenon was not limited to trend cycles. It was structural. It tapped into something larger. The growing distrust of old media, the rise of decentralized content platforms, the influence of AI tools, and the empowerment of ordinary users to shape global narratives in real time. While Western institutions continued to broadcast old frames portraying Iran as aggressor and itself as defender, a new generation saw something different. They saw injustice. They saw disproportionate force. They saw images of day and night bombings of civilian areas. They saw schools destroyed. They saw families shattered, and they saw a voice, Ebrahim Zolfaghari, articulating defiance not just in Persian, but in a language the world could understand. This trend had a feedback effect. The more ordinary people engaged with viral clips about Iran's struggle, the more attention global media platforms were forced to pay. Algorithms amplified what people shared, not what institutions dictated. This created a loop, a cultural feedback loop, where content in favor of Iran's perspective spread not through official channels, but through the very networks that define public opinion today. TikTok, Instagram Reels, YouTube Shorts, AI playlists, decentralized social platforms. And within this loop, Zolfaghari became a legendary figure. Not because a government told people to see him that way, but because millions chose to portray him that way. Across Tehran and every major Iranian city, support for him intensified, not just as a military figure, but as a symbol of global resistance. Public squares were filled with banners that displayed his image alongside slogans not of hatred, but of dignity and defiance. Millions chanted his name, not because they were blindly loyal, but because they saw in him someone who had articulated what they were living and feeling. In the war rooms of Western capitals, this phenomenon was not lost on strategists. They observed it with confusion, alarm, and disbelief. How could a military spokesman, someone not known outside Iran 2 years ago, become a global cultural force? The answer was simple. Because culture is no longer controlled by institutions. It is co-created by ordinary people with extraordinary access to media tools. Zolfaghari understood this, and he exploited it masterfully. While other nations responded to digital engagement with bureaucratic press releases and scripted spokespeople, he spoke with a combination of conviction, clarity, and emotional honesty that resonated across cultural divides. His fluency in English was not a censorship-filtered translation. It was direct, unscripted, real. He did not apologize for Iran's sovereignty. He did not retreat into historical slogans alone. He addressed modern audiences in their own linguistic frame. He used humor, sarcasm, rhetoric, and emotional appeal in the same moment. This blend made him not just understandable, but relatable. Not just a leader, but a voice. And as a result, the narrative began to flip. The very nation that for decades had been presented as the world's antagonist, Iran, began to gain sympathy in corners of the globe that once never considered its perspective. Ordinary Americans who had never cared about geopolitics before were now producing viral content that questioned Western policy, highlighted civilian casualties, and portrayed Iran not as a threat, but as a nation under siege. This movement was powered by ordinary people, not state media. Teenagers in Kansas, college students in Berlin, coders in Mumbai. They were producing, remixing, sharing, and debating content that favored Iran's narrative. And on every platform where youth engage, where culture evolves, the old scripts were falling apart. In this strange twist of history, a spokesman from Tehran became a global symbol of resistance and media mastery, harnessing the new age of decentralized storytelling. The war, which was once reported as a clash of armies and missiles, became equally a clash of narratives. A war where stories, clips, edits, AI visuals, and viral soundbites shaped how millions perceived reality. In this media battlefield, Iran's story, championed by voices like Zolfaghari's, began to gain traction. Not because governments ordered it, but because people chose it. And this choice mattered. For a generation that grew up mistrustful of old institutions, mistrustful of filtered narratives, mistrustful of scripted governments, Zolfaghari's voice offered something different. Not propaganda, but a narrative that aligned with what they saw, felt, and understood through their own screens. This is the reason his phrases spread. This is the reason his words became memes. This is the reason that millions began to frame him, not as a war authoritarian or a hidden strategist, but as a hero of the modern media age. He became something far larger than military stature. He became a global icon, a phenomenon that rose not through power alone, but through perception, digital resonance, narrative impact, and cultural momentum. From bombed streets to global screens, from silence to viral soundbites, from Tehran to every corner of the world. In the new media age, power is shaped not just by force, but by story. And Ebrahim Zolfaghari, fluent, articulate, strategic, fearless, became a living example of this new paradigm. A hero, not just of Iran, but in the eyes of millions across the world. A voice in the chaos, a legend in the making. A man who understood that in the 21st century, winning the media war is often more consequential than winning a battlefield. And as ordinary people continue to share, remix, debate, and spread his words, one truth stands clear. In this era of decentralized narratives and cultural upheaval, Ebrahim Zolfaghari is not just fighting a war. He is shaping the story of a generation.